Good day and welcome to today's Capital One Listening and Leading webinar with CoSIDA. We are pleased to offer a session on basketball game day media guidelines and hosting in the pandemic, a discussion with CoSIDA and the United States Basketball Writers Association. Please welcome today's presenters. Seth Davis, President of the USBW, a sports writer and broadcaster for The Athletic and CBS Sports. Mike Kern, Associate Commissioner of the Missouri Valley Conference. Kenny Klein, Senior Associate Athletic Director at SID at the University of Louisville. Colin McDonough, Assistant Athletic Director at Northwest Missouri State University. And Malcolm Moran, Executive Director of USBW and Professor in the IUPUI Sports Capital Journalism Program. Thank you for joining us today, gentlemen. Each of these presenters were part of the working group that developed the basketball media guidelines, which were released earlier this month. I'm Will Rolston, Associate Executive Director of CoSIDA, and will serve as your webinar moderator today. We appreciate you joining us for what should be an outstanding conversation. Before we begin, we would like to say a quick thank you to our corporate partner, Capital One, presenting sponsor of CoSIDA's Professional Development and Continuing Education Series. As a reminder, the on-demand webinar will be posted later today on CoSIDA.com and CoSIDA's YouTube channel. We will also offer this as a podcast, and you'll be able to download it from the services listed on CoSIDA.com. Please invite your colleagues to listen and watch the on-demand webinar, as it is free to everyone. Thanks to all who have submitted questions in advance. We encourage you to submit any questions you might have here during the course of our webinar. You can place your questions in the chat box, and your questions will be addressed throughout the webinar. For starters, please know that these guidelines are to be considered that, just guidelines are best practices, and we certainly understand that local regulations in your area will be key factors and will take precedence and impact what you're able to do at your institution. We would like to thank the USBW and CoSIDA members who helped put this document together. So we appreciate all their assistance. You see the document there. It can be downloaded and viewed anytime on CoSIDA.com. So let's begin. Mike, we'll start with you. Why was this an important undertaking for CoSIDA and SIDs?
Well, in my opinion, it provides some guidance and answers in a time when all we have is uncertainty. The MVC postponed its fall sports back in August, and since that time, our primary focus has been figuring out a path to safely launch the basketball season, and I think that's pretty consistent with others that have moved their fall sports to the spring. We do have a COVID-19 working group that meets weekly, with subsets also meeting routinely throughout the week and examining all aspects, including testing, contact tracing, operations, officials, and of course the media. You know, having a national panel providing some guidance to our COVID working group help take one thing off their plate. We would have some people say, well, what are we going to do about the media? And I said, we're going to have some national guidelines and some recommendations. So it simplified their process, and it also protects to the largest extent possible our biggest allies, which is our friends in the media.
Thanks, Mike. Malcolm, from your perspective in USBW, why was collaboration important between these two organizations?
Well, it was a natural will, primarily because we're always mindful that a significant percentage of our membership is people in sports information offices. So in many ways, this was as much of an internal conversation as it was a conversation between organizations. And it just became clear, I think, to all of us during that week of March 9th, when one by one things were shutting down, that we're facing an ongoing situation that has no instruction manual at all. And so if there was any way that we could collaborate and at least come up with some ideas and a give and take that could be put down in a document, that would help everyone.
Kenny, as you were a part of this process, what did you find were some of the highlights, or what do you think should be some of the key takeaways that SIDs and media, for that matter, should take?
Well, I think obviously we've got a good document there that has a lot of specifics in it, but I think number one, the flexibility is the key to sanity during all this what's going on. We've already seen so many games being moved, and you almost have to expect that something's going to happen along the way. You know, we're hosting our own 16-game, 10-day bubble type event right now, and before we even got started, had 4 teams that had issues. We lost a couple of them. So it's going to happen this year. So we understand that, and then we've got to try and follow these guidelines and communicate well. I think each of you in your own conference or state have protocols that you have to follow, but these guidelines are really meant to help guide you, not to be a definitive way of doing things, but some may have fans, some may not. Some may be able to use those areas without when you don't have fans to be more flexible in accommodating media in distanced areas and such. And I think it's also important for all the SIDs to help each other out. Obviously, travel is going to be more limited this year. So any way we can help our colleagues out is very important. I think in each of your venues, safety measures are number one. That's what's allowing us to play, is taking the right measures, whether it's temperatures, health assessments for the media coming in, but just make sure you communicate whatever that is in advance. You're going to have seating limitations, obviously, in many places. Again, I think conferences, in our conference, for instance, they're dictating who is on that front row of the scores table. But then you've got other areas that you may be able to use. Even here, we'll be able to have 3,000 fans in a 20,000 seat arena, but there's still areas to put media. And we've still been able to find maybe some upper photo locations for some people that would not be able to be in the arena. And then I think also with all these things that we're doing actually at the game and such, it's important to communicate methods of covering your team without a credential. There's nothing like being in the arena or being even with limited or no fans, but there's still ways for media to generate coverage. I'm sure most everybody's doing all their post games virtually, live stats available online. Most games are going to be televised live or even at smaller levels broadcast on radio. We've all got our game notes online and probably wouldn't have printed copies available for people anyhow. And then at least in our league, we're doing a pool photographer to provide photographs and video for everyone. So, I think that touches on a couple of the things. I'll be happy to talk more later, but again, just communicating amongst each other, helping each other out, I think are important things.
Seth, from the media's perspective, both the process and what became important to you as this document was put together and this conversation was happening.
Well, it was incredibly edifying, for me. As you all know, with the basketball writers, the presidency is a one term unless Malcolm insists I stay on longer, or maybe I won't concede. Actually, is what I'm going to do. And so you sort of move into this role, and for me, it was really great listening experience. And I love Malcolm's point about how many SIDs are a part of the Basketball Writers Association. I mean, we are on the same team. There are areas and times where our agendas and needs are going to diverge, but we still want to end up in the same place, and that's to see the game be healthy, to see fans interested and engaged and informed. And so I just thought the discussions were absolutely, terrific. We're all facing, disruptions. Kenny hit on a couple of words I think are really important. One is communication. A lot of people in this webinar have the word communication in their job title. So I find that in situations like this, or in a friendship or a work situation or a marriage, that communication is critical. And if you're communicating is also listening. So we listen to each other. So here's what I'm dealing with. Because sometimes they go, well, they should do this, or you guys should do this, or it should just be this way. And you just don't quite know what everyone is taking in elsewhere. And then the other thing that Kenny mentioned that I think is really the coin of the realm for the season is flexibility. I understand when people say, well, we want order, we want things to be lined up, we want one standard that we can implement across the board that everybody follows. My answer to that is, if you want order, you've got the wrong pandemic. This is mass chaos, and it's global, and it extends well beyond college basketball. So yeah, it's chaotic, and yes, it's disorder, but I think we need to keep our tolerance high for that uncertainty because it does give us flexibility to react to very, very fast changing circumstances. We all agree that health and safety is first and foremost, and there's not even a second. It's the only real consideration. But once that has been addressed, what else can we do to ensure, the key words that Malcolm and I and the football writers and APSC put out in our statement are essential and independent. We believe that independent media organizations have an essential role to play. Now, what that translates to in terms of how they carry out that role, how many people are allowed to be where to carry out that role, lots of variance in that from school to school, conference to conference, state to state. But to the degree that we can preserve the essential role of independent media news organizations, I think there are a lot of ways forward that can satisfy everybody's concerns and needs during a very, very difficult time period.
Thanks, Seth. Colin, from your perspective, again, some people may view this document and say, well, that just applies to schools with lots of media and lots of seats and everything. You're in a little different situation. You got a very successful Division II program there at Northwest Missouri State. But how have you dealt with it there, and how do you deal with trying to handle all these social distance requirements while also probably trying to get more media to cover your school than might normally?
Yeah, well, I'm certainly glad that you included us on this on the panel here. It's not just Division I that's handling all this. Division II, Division III, NAIA schools from all levels of hoops. We're all going through different challenges, and although some of this may not always apply to D2, D3, NAIA, there's certain pieces of this that we can all use and help to get us through it. Try to do just Zoom interviews after games. I think it's kind of hard if teams are doing double headers, men's and women's double headers. That's going to be difficult with small staffing, things like that. But maybe it can be done after a game. I know this past weekend, the MIAA Division II had some games, and Emporia State's Don Wiest, I saw him do a post-game Zoom with his head coach and media members, and they were able to get the information out, and he posted on his website afterwards, so fans could even see that too, whereas sometimes in the past you're not always seeing all the information that's getting out there. When you think that you're trying to get media coverage, I think you have a chance of getting more media coverage at this point, maybe not in your arena, but folks aren't going places. So it's a matter of them reaching out to you reaching out to them and letting them know we got a Zoom interview. You can do a phone interview with an athlete, with an email, cell phone. We can talk over the phone. There's so many different areas that we can reach out to. We're not just stymied by, oh, I can't come to your game, I can't cover it. No, there's other ways, from streaming games to, as we talked about earlier, radio broadcasts. There's so many other ways that you can get your games out there and folks can still cover you. And it's not just the big boys that are getting all the coverage.
Kenny, speaking of the big boys, obviously you've got a successful program there, and you talked about some of the changes you've already had to deal with. But you've got to work with a civic arena. You've got potentially large media contingents that you may need to limit. You probably have some visiting media at the ACC level. But how are you trying to navigate those key pieces of game operations?
Well, a few things. We've had to put in some plexiglass in some areas. By having fans here, we've put in a lot of plexiglass around the bench areas and such. Even though the benches are distanced and such, we have added some things there. From a media standpoint, the television networks, we've had to bump the cameras to an upper deck to meet some ESPN protocols that are in place. Obviously we've tried to hang on to so many courtside seats over the years and have been successful in that, but now with the pandemic, nobody's at courtside. So we've kind of bumped everybody up into our upper seating area, and then those seats are distanced as well. So obviously you're dealing with much smaller numbers, but we also have to keep in mind that even though we have our own home media, that we need to set aside some seats for the visiting team and for any national people like Seth that might want to show up at one of our events. So those are important too. But particularly when you have fans and you're dealing with, and anybody's got different state guidelines and such. So there's so many places that have no fans, so small number of fans, small numbers of media, maybe no media. So, there's some areas that may not have any media. So you're almost dictated by what you're allowed to do. our governor, for instance, came out with some statements on things that we have to follow everything that he says. So, I mean, whether we like it or not. So you just have to be able to, again, to adjust and hopefully when you do have fans there to be able to still have a nice atmosphere at the game, properly distanced.
Kenny, what are you doing relative to, printouts or game notes? Are you going everything digital? I will assume limited to no media backstage space, such as a media workroom in your instance?
Yeah, everything is digital. We are not printing any notes in our press rooms as we normally would. We're not printing statistics. Obviously, everything is online in that, and I think people have adjusted to that. We've seen that in football. We haven't done there. We do print, and we have printed flip cards in football. We'll still print roster cards and flip cards and put those at everyone's seat so they have that readily available. I think you'll see different things that are being done on the benches. There's always a lot of paper being delivered to benches for stats. At least in our league, we chose to have at least 4 paper box scores printed at each timeout for the coaches. I know SIDs get hit with that a lot too. So, there's some leagues have gone to having iPads on the benches. If everybody agrees to it, they can get a variance for that. Because normally there are not electronic aids allowed on benches, but again, our league discussed it, chose not to do it. So those are a few of the things there that you mentioned.
Thank you, Kenny. Like from a conference office or conference SID perspective, you have a conference tournament up. Probably in March. You're probably hoping to get to that point, and we're all still playing. But what do you know now, and how are you approaching that with so many unknowns at this point?
Well, Will, oddly enough, our tournament begins 100 days from today, so we don't know much about what the tournament format's going to look like. We do bring all 10 teams to our tournament and have nine games over 4 days. We're going to learn a lot from the multi-team events that are going on right now, and including the one Kenny's and Louisville's hosting this weekend. And we'll get some experiences from those events and how they manage multiple teams in the same site at the same time. We're going to learn a lot from our schools during the non-conference play and what they do in the home environment. It's complicated, of course, as a tournament where you're convening 10 schools in one building for 4 days, and you have 5 times more than the media than you would during a regular season game, possibly. But our plan is to prepare for the worst case scenario and increase in media involvement and attendance as much as possible. If you're hosting at campus sites or higher seeds, you can also learn a lot from your projected host schools throughout the year. Physical distancing, print media workspaces, media meals, TV coverage, radio, access to team and player coaches, all those things are what you're considering, and everything is changing, including what you do with fans and sponsors and hospitality functions. So we do have a lot of questions, but we'll make our decisions next month and move forward with the plan that we develop, and until we have to possibly pivot again. But as Seth said earlier, a safe execution is our primary focus and our sole focus. But we are still storytellers. Our stories aren't going to go away, so we can't forget about our responsibility to make those connections in any way possible with the media and our teams and student athletes.
Sure. Colin, I'm not sure this is specifically your case at Northwest, but this question comes from one of our audience members and says, what do you do when social distancing is impossible with your facility size or setup? Any recommendations you could offer there?
I think in the committee talking, we certainly discussed the areas of maybe in the arena having empty seats. If there's fans aren't in the arena, then media can move to empty seats that are in the arena, if it's even at the upper part of the arena, as long as you're away from folks. I know some of the arenas that we're dealing with on the Division II, Division III NAI levels are pretty small gyms, and there's not a whole lot of space in there. But if you can just carve out a space just to be in the gym, I know from a fan standpoint they want to be there, but if fans can't be there, hopefully media members can get in there and share the stories of the game that they need to. If you can't get in there, get on via stream, via radio. Our situation is a little different, Northwest Missouri State, where we have a kind of a radio press box and a media spot where it's actually away and up from it's almost like a football venue where you're away from the the playing surface, so we can actually socially distance upstairs. BOA radio crews can be a part. The partitions are already built in, so it's a little different from our standpoint. But there's not always those situations that exist. And I think just working with your facility members, working with your athletic director, working with the coaches, just figuring out ways to make sure that we can get media members in safely. That also doesn't affect the health of student athletes, coaches, and other administrators.
I know one of the things, again, access has been important to you. You stress that throughout our time as a working group. But what do you think are some tips that SIDs could take away from making virtual press conferences better and more useful for writers, whether it be game day or between games?
Well, I mean, I think they've been great. I mean, I think the main thing is getting the word out. The more advance notice that we have, the better for everybody, so that we can attend. I think they've been incredibly helpful. One of the things that we did talk about is, augmenting those access opportunities for people who are on site. One of the few things that everybody at the games has more of in this situation is space. There are probably no fans in your arenas, maybe very few fans, limited attendance. So are there ways to utilize space that would be able to create more access opportunities safely, always safely, to coaches and players? If there's no concessions happening, there's probably space deep inside an arena that would normally be devoted to either people who are working in those areas or food prep and what have you. And so, there was kind of the question about, well, is it kind of unfair to the reporters who are there? Like if there's a Zoom press conference with the coach, is there a chance for those reporters who are there to talk with the coach additionally, or to talk to players one-on-one or in small groups off of Zoom just because they happen to be there? It's unfortunate that everybody can't be everywhere right now, but we are used to seeing, for people who are making the effort to get to places and taking on the expense of going to places to the degree that they should benefit from that. I don't think any of their colleagues would have too much of a problem for that. So I would encourage people not to automatically foreclose that. Talk to your writers about what they might want to do outside of their Zoom opportunities, and if it can be done safely, spaced out, wearing masks, then I hope you guys will find a way to do that. I mean, as Mike put it beautifully, I mean, there's still great stories to tell, and fewer people at your games means more people wishing that they were there, and more people watching your games from home wanting to know what's really going on, and really thirsting for that, connection that, the independent media is able to give. So, the Zoom stuff has been great. I would always encourage you to talk to your writers and ask them if you could do more for them, what would they prefer? And then how is it, is it possible that it could be executed safely? Go for it.
Thanks. Malcolm, staying on the media side, and as you talk to your members or the writers and broadcasters and such within your membership, what are you hearing about their ability or want to travel and be actually at games as opposed to solely covering them remotely?
It's very much a case-by-case basis, because a lot of people are operating on the premise that if you can avoid flying, that you should, for safety reasons. But also there are very serious economic issues that a lot of media outlets are going through now. And so there may be other situations where somebody isn't going to travel to a road game, even though he or she covers a team as a beat, because they can't afford, the editor decides they can't afford to fly. So one of the heartening things about the exercise that we went through is that we did our best to try to find a way to have guidelines that accommodated people that can't be there, whether it's because of personal medical advice they're getting or economic limitations, while at the same time, as Seth pointed out, rewarding the initiative for the people that do go to the effort to be there. I mean, I think a lot of people, and this is just anecdotally, are extending the amount of distance they're willing to drive to cover a road game if it means they can be there. So we tried to look out for the best interests of both.
Very good. Point this one to Kenny and to Colin. Kenny, we'll have you go first, but as you talk with your senior administrators and others who may not understand, all the details you have to work out with or the needs or wants of the media, what recommendations do you have for our viewers today in terms of working with senior administration to try to get as much as you can while still abiding by the appropriate social distancing and other regulations that happen to be in place in your locale? Kenny?
It's I think that was one of the reasons of having a document like we have is helpful to each of the SIDs out there, is it gives some guidelines and it gives something where you can go to your administration and say, hey, these are national guidelines here, and this is what we would what everybody is hoping to do and hoping to accomplish during this pandemic. And then that might be coupled with with what we have here. We're trying to socially distance 3,000 people within a lower arena and trying to capture little places where I could stick media or stick cameras or do some other things, becomes a financial issue too when you've got a season ticket base that well exceeds 3,000 and you're trying to squeeze a few people in there. So that becomes a little bit of an administrative issue too. But again, when you're trying to do the best for the media that are here covering you, because they're making the effort to be here, as Malcolm was saying, and Seth, that we need to do our best to give them the best opportunity to generate those stories covering us. And fortunately, it depends on how your athletic director, how your other senior administrators take to those kind of things. Fortunately, in my position, I'm a part of our senior administration, so I have a good voice with that, and that's probably why we've been able to hang on to a few of those courtside seats when so many of them have been disappearing over the years. And so they understand the need for it. They understand that we've got to find ways to make it work, and then there's a little give and take on all of it, though.
Colin, from your perspective at Northwest?
I know that when we talked on this as the group met, we were talking about making sure we share this information with administrators, with assistant ADs, with athletic directors, with facility crews. So I know one of the areas is when games ended, making sure that there's enough time for the media to still file stories to get things done after game, if it's 45 minutes or if it's an hour, but making sure that you share that with the staff and facilities that are in charge of that. So if a game ends, they're not just shutting the doors and locking you out and just saying, hey, we talked about this ahead of time. We know that things are tight here, but we want to make sure that everybody has the same opportunity to get in and out of the building as you normally would. So again, it just comes down to sharing information, and that's the business of what we're in. We're sharing information.
One follow-up to that too, Colin brings up a good point, because you may be pressed with some specific hours of when people can show up and when they can leave. It was a good discussion on our call about, some places have, for instance, 2 hours prior arriving, leaving 2 hours after, and at least making that 2 hours after to be after the last media availability or post-game call. So that was, I know, important to our USBWA brethren when we were speaking.
Mike, I'll ask you this question from our audience, since you obviously deal with a number of schools within your conference, and I'm sure it's going to vary by school, but what are you hearing in terms of our radio crews traveling on the road? If they are they traveling with the official team party as they might? And what are you hearing in that regard in terms of travel and radio crews and other maybe peripheral folks like that?
Yeah, we had talked. We meet weekly as a group, the SIDs, the basketball SIDs in our league and league staff, and we did talk about radios and traveling radio crews. And for the most part, our radio crews will not travel. Some of it was a decision before Learfield had kind of asked that they find another solution. So we've got 8 of our 10 schools are Learfield partners, and the 2 that aren't had already made a decision not to travel. They're going to be using television feed to be able to call the games from home. But The ones that will travel separately, the SIDs will probably not travel on the bus. They might travel separately. We're a driving league for the most part, so it's a little bit easier for us to do that. But I think the peripheral people that you mentioned were all going to travel separate than the team.
Kenny, another question from our audience. Are you, or in terms of the ACC rules, are you taking temperatures of credentialed media before they enter the venue on game days?
We are, but it's everybody that comes in the arena. It's not just the media. So really everybody at the door gets that. One thing that we are doing in addition to taking temperatures for media is we have a very short online health assessment that goes down all the basics of, you know, have you been in contact with someone with the virus? Have you, you know, have you been feeling ill? All the regular questions there, but it allows somebody to get that done before they come to the arena. So they get their temperature checked. We have a way of checking to assure that they have filled out that survey before they get here. All the media that come to our games get an email in advance that kind of go down all the different things, all the different protocols, a link to that survey, you know, the times that we had mentioned of arrival and departure, and all the other elements of the media operation setup that they may need to know. You know, we didn't talk about food, but you know, we used to have a wonderful buffet before games. You know, now we're down to just drinks. You know, so the concession stands are generally open, but they may not be open in a lot of places. So there may be people allowing media to bring in a snack or food or a beverage or something in some cases. So that's something too, particularly when, you know, we're in this bubble setup where we've got 3 or 4 games going on a given day, and it's important to be able to grab a snack or grab something to drink or so during the course of the day.
Sure. Thank you, Kenny. Another question from our audience, and I'll actually start by answering this, but it says, when you have fewer seats at the scorers table available, again, as you try to accommodate social distancing, you know, what are crews doing with their stat crew and things of that nature? I can tell you, I am the official scorebook for Butler University here in Indianapolis, and their scorers table between their 2 team benches is normally 20 people, and they're going to have a total of 6 on that table this year, using that whole space that used to accommodate, you know, 20. And it's going to be very, you know, Spartan. It's going to be, you know, the game clock, the shot clock, the PA, the scorebook, the DVR, you know, replay, and the TOC. And that is going to be it. Now, we may have to yell down from one end of the table to the other to communicate among ourselves, but it's interesting just how they're going to do that. Now, they have an auxiliary kind of corner media area where they're going to put their stat crew. It's where their media normally is. Colin, are you experiencing any of that there? I think you mentioned earlier you have an auxiliary space that you've been able to use to accommodate a little more than you might otherwise be able to.
We have been. In the past, we normally were right next to the visiting team bench, and which is a part of the scorers table, but we'll move upstairs and have our crew upstairs. I certainly enjoy being close to the action, and if something happens at the scorers table, it's easier just to run down and find out what's going on from an official standpoint. If there's a technical foul or something that you're just trying to figure out how to code it in the live stats. But we certainly we'll adjust to it. I think there's some areas where you can be across the floor. You wouldn't have to be on the scorers table side. You could be across the on the where normally fans might be or media might be. But you can certainly adjust. In the stat crew with the NCAA live stats, it feels like you need certainly 2 people and probably 3 people to call it. So it's still trying to find space where you can fit 3 people together and putting on masks. If you can put on headsets, I know some folks have talked about getting headsets for their SID crews and just making sure that you can all talk amongst each other and be at a safe distance apart too. So there's just a lot of different variances, and it certainly just depends on each venue, knowing if you have the space or if you can go upstairs, you can go in the stands. There's just it's certainly a different beast, but we got to find ways to attack it and make it work.
Very good. I'll turn this question to any of our SIDs. It's kind of a really technical question, but I think it's, you know, going to elicit some good responses. But in terms of you know, visiting radio, not traveling, has anyone figured out or have advice on how to enable that feed to pick up some natural arena sound back to where the broadcasters may be back, you know, in your city or your arena calling the game virtually?
One thing that we're doing here for a couple of the teams that are here at this event, we're taking the natural sound we're putting it on a Zoom type call with a video feed of the up camera. So the main follow camera that would be there. So, and you almost have to do that in addition to that. Otherwise, if you're watching it on television and trying to put that natural sound with the television feed, is going to be there's going to be quite a delay involved there. So you almost have to have both of them coming from the site if you're going to try and use natural sound.
Good. Malcolm, if you could just give any general advice to the relationship between SIDs and media as we navigate this year, what would it be?
Well, the two things that were consistently discussed when we had those multiple sessions have been creativity and flexibility. And I think one of the things that was really heartening about the whole process is that I felt a spirit of cooperation that had maybe lapsed a little bit over the years, not because it's anybody's fault, but part of it is social media stresses or other reasons. But I think there was a collective realization that we really do depend on each other to find solutions in a way that frequently happened in the old days. And so things like, for instance, and this is always going to be an issue, but like a lot of other things, there's going to be more stress this season. If you're playing a late game, if you're playing in a 9 o'clock game, the sooner that Zoom session can be executed, the better it is for everybody, particularly if there's a building or a local regulation that says people have to be out X minutes after the game is over. And so you have two deadlines. You have your office's deadline, but now you're going to be out in the cold and you don't want to have to look for a fast food place with Wi-Fi so you can finish filing your story. So I think just keeping an open mind, being creative, and being willing to give on both ends is going to be the reason that we're all going to make this work.
Kenny, Malcolm mentioned the word stress, and another question from our audience, and you've obviously had football games there at Louisville to go through that maybe helped you in some of the decisions you tried to make for basketball. But from your perspective as an SID, what has been the most stressful aspect of trying to host media or prepare to host media in this time of pandemic?
I think just waiting for guidelines as we were getting closer is the one thing, but really what so many schools are experiencing now, as our women's basketball team did, is just the changes in schedule. I mean, those things are, you don't know if you're going to have a game, you don't know if you're going to be playing, you're preparing for a game, and then all of a sudden it's not there. Then you're trying to help your coaches find another game to maybe replace that. That's, I think yesterday alone, our women's basketball team lost 2 games and picked up 1. So I think that's, unfortunately, we've seen a lot of that going on around right now. But, that and then, I'm at the arena now. We had a press conference just before this. Our team's practicing. We've got other things, but just getting everything in place, really breaking out the tape measure, making sure you're 6 feet away from things. You talked about the scores table setup. We've got a scores table and then another row just behind the scores table that we're putting our stats crews and our PA announcer and people like that. Some teams I know are going 3 rows there. So that's another area where you could take people and try and carve out some more areas there, particularly if you're not having fans at your arena. Another thing too that was brought up earlier, just if we're using these different locations for media, let's make sure that there's good Wi-Fi and power, decent lighting in those areas too. That you're thinking of those things when you're maybe setting those things up. And again, we've got a wonderful arena. We've got a wonderful group of staff here, but it's challenging for all of us because we're having to adjust. The different, the governor may come out with some new thing, and you've got to change everything that you've done, and that's, just the sheer change of how things, it's just not going to be, business as usual every day. You're just going to have to be flexible and adjust to whatever those new plans are.
Mike, as schools grapple with the travel party size and distancing, of course, how important, or what have you been hearing, is it for SIDs, to travel again, maybe in this unusual year, to do the things that they would normally do, the personal touch, or the safety become more important? And what are you hearing from your conference SIDs?
Yeah, we've talked about travel, and we're a mixed bag. We have some of the schools that won't travel until the conference tournament, or will travel until the other fall sports that move to the spring start their season. So we have a different situation for each school, and I think our issue is going to be staffing home events when basketball is on the road and other sports are on the road and other sports are at home. So I think that the travel will be limited for us. And I can't remember who said it earlier on to start the call. Maybe it was Kenny, but I think we're going to have to rely on each other for help a great deal in terms of sharing of photos and video. And that's for media too, media coverage too. Your beat writer may go and you're not going with them, but I think we have to work together, and the host school has to be more cognizant of helping the visitor out when they can't travel.
And kind of along those lines, Mike, for the home SIDs and home arenas, we mentioned it earlier about being able to file games from at the end of or file stories at the end of the game and not have to find that Wi-Fi fast food restaurant, as Malcolm mentioned. But are you finding, at least in your conference, that that's going to be pretty well able to be accommodated? I know you have a mix of campus arenas and some civic arenas in your conference.
Yeah, we also talked about that, and I think we're in good shape with allowing media to stay afterward. And I would argue, if you're an SID talking to your administrators, I would argue that the safest place for your media member to be is in the arena, socially distanced from others while they're filing their stories. You don't want to kick them out and have them work from a fast food restaurant where it's probably unsafe. It's much better if they're just finishing up their work and getting out at a reasonable time. And if the cap is 2 hours, as we recommended, the cap is 2 hours, and I think that might be sufficient enough time for all media at all levels to get their stories done after the last media availability.
Very good. Before we kind of do a wrap around here, any thoughts from the group you'd like to present? Colin, I'll give you an opportunity to kind of wrap up things from the SID perspective that you would like to be some key takeaways for our SIDs.
I think it's just being able to adjust, stay in contact with your opponents, with your opponent SIDs, and letting them know the travel and plans like that. I mean, it's working ahead. Things are going to change. You can work a week ahead, and then 2 days before somebody might say they're not coming, or they can't come, or the game's postponed. It's all working ahead. And if you're working ahead and planning ahead, then you're going to be able to adjust easily and make those things happen. If you're holding off and you're not doing things in advance and not planning ahead, then it's going to eat you alive, and it's going to be tough. It's tough enough as it is. So we got to just work ahead, plan ahead, work together is the biggest thing that's going to get us all through this.
Seth, similarly, from your perspective and USBWA, some final takeaways for our audience today.
Well, first of all the unfortunate casualties of the COVID-19 pandemic, losing the buffet at Louisville is definitely at the top of my list. It was, along with seeing Kenny, it was the main reason I ever went to the games. I don't really care for basketball that much. I'll just leave you with this one swing thought, because look, I mean, you guys are going to have to make certain decisions at a certain point, right? You're dealing with administrators and athletic directors and governors and county officials and doctors. So, but there's been interesting, and this has actually been sort of a kind of a cool, almost reset, right? Of talking about, the roles of, writers versus broadcasters versus camera people versus whoever, and sort of where to draw what lines for what reason. And so one of the things has been coming up of, the issue of families, players' families, coaches' families, and athletic directors' family. And, that you all might be in a position to tell your leading scorer's mother that she can't come to a game or can't sit in a certain spot, but this sports writer can. And that's not an easy position to be in. And so look, no one would argue that, you know, the writers are more important to your programs than your families. So it's not a question of as important, more important, less important. It's just a different role. You know, you're not going to say to, no one's going to complain that the referee's in the building, right? The referee has a certain role on game night. He's got to be on the court to be able to perform that function, or the game can't happen. In normal situations, you give your media, you know, parking passes, press row access, great food at KFC Yum Center, press conference access, things that you don't give to your families, just like the families go in certain places in the arena, whether it's a lounge, the coach's house for a barbecue, that the media doesn't go. So it's just different. And so, you know, to the degree that you get into situations where maybe you have to make some of these choices, first of all, we're very much in favor of offering the off-ramp that if you can't accommodate your entire press corps, that you do select a certain small number so that there is an independent, essential presence in the building to serve in the capacity that like a pool reporter might serve in. And that if you have to have those conversations, understand that, no, we're not as important as mom and dad or Mrs. Coach, but we do have an important function that we play, you know, during the games that's beyond what the broadcast partner plays that night. And we ask you to honor that as best as you can. And, you know, to the degree that you have to make, you know, tough choices, just communicate with us and let's engage and let's hear everybody out. So at least everybody's perspective can be accounted for before those decisions get made. But, you know, to Malcolm's point, it's been a great process. It's a great, you know, we'll often say that, you know, every crisis presents an opportunity. I think these conversations probably should have been happening anyway, and they've been very healthy. We're all in this together. We all want the game to thrive and survive, so we don't have to go out and get real jobs. And so webinars like this are extremely helpful in fostering that communication. Everybody here knows how to reach me. If you have any questions, you want to reach out, call me, email me, text me, DM me, wave at me, throw up a bat signal, whatever you want to do. I'm here, happy to engage, and I'm very much appreciative of you guys having me and Malcolm on this call.
Thank you, Seth. And I think that same could be said for each of our panelists. I'd be happy to take your email or a call if you have any specific questions that come up after today's webinar or at any point during the season. So thanks to each of you. We greatly appreciate your time and your insight today. We'd also like to thank everyone who joined us for today's informative session. Appreciate you joining us. A reminder that you can find this webinar on demand later this afternoon on CoSIDA.com and on CoSIDA's YouTube channel. Will also be offered in a podcast format on CoSIDA.com. All these on-demand options are free of charge. So thanks again for joining us today, and note that additional webinars and podcasts and some educational lounge small group sessions are being planned for December. So we encourage you to check CoSIDA.com often for updated information on these professional development opportunities. And finally, a quick reminder about our CoSIDA.com freelancers database page. You can access it directly on CoSIDA.com/freelance or under the careers tab on CoSIDA.com. We encourage everyone to request to be added, and you don't need to be a CoSIDA member to do so. Any freelance statistician or other game day personnel are welcome, and there's no charge to be included on our freelancer list. With that, again, we thank our panelists, and we wish everyone a good day. Goodbye, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Hey, everyone.